The video went viral in minutes. Fake soldier exposed at electronics store. People laughed, mocked, and shared it 1,000 times over. The teenager behind the camera thought he had captured a fraud, someone pretending to be a hero. But what the shaky phone footage never revealed was the small blue ribbon resting quietly on David Martinez's chest. A ribbon with white stars, the Medal of Honor. The rarest of decorations, awarded to fewer than 3,500 Americans in all of history. And within hours, that overlooked detail would transform this viral humiliation into one of the most shameful accusations the store and the nation had ever witnessed. David Martinez had never wanted attention. At 43, he preferred the quiet corners of life, his small apartment in San Antonio, his part-time job at a veterans counseling center, and the weekly poker games with his old squad buddies. The only time he wore his dress blues was for ceremonies he couldn't avoid: funerals, memorial services, and the occasional school visit where kids asked him about his prosthetic hand. That Tuesday afternoon, he just finished speaking at Roosevelt High School about the importance of service and sacrifice. The students had listened with the kind of respectful silence that reminded him why he still believed in the next generation. His uniform was still crisp, his medals properly aligned, when he decided to stop by the electronics store on his way home. He needed a new phone charger. Nothing fancy, nothing that required explaining himself. But the moment he walked through the automatic doors, conversation stopped. Heads turned. In a town where military personnel were common, something about David drew stares. Maybe it was the limp from his injured leg, or the way his prosthetic hand moved differently when he reached for items on the shelf. Maybe it was simply that people had forgotten what real sacrifice looked like. He found the charger he needed and made his way to the checkout line. Behind the counter stood Tyler Walsh, 19 years old, community college dropout, and someone who spent more time on social media than reading history books. Tyler saw the uniform and immediately felt that familiar surge of superiority that comes from thinking you know better than everyone else. "Military discount?" Tyler asked, but his tone carried an edge. "You got some ID to prove you're actually military?" David reached for his wallet, pulling out his veteran's card. Tyler examined it like it might be counterfeit, then looked back at David with open skepticism. "This could be fake too," Tyler said, loud enough for other customers to hear. "I mean, lots of people buy these uniforms online now. Stolen valor is everywhere." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Other customers began to listen, some pulling out their phones. David felt the familiar tightness in his chest, not from fear, but from the exhausting reality of having to prove his worth to someone who had never risked anything for anyone. "Son," David said quietly, "I've got my military ID. I've got my discharge papers if you need." "Yeah, everyone's got fake paperwork these days," Tyler interrupted, his confidence growing with each word. "Real soldiers don't just walk around in dress uniforms shopping at Best Buy." A woman in line behind David whispered to her husband, "Maybe he's right. Something does seem off." Tyler's voice grew louder. "I've seen enough stolen valor videos to know a fake when I see one. You probably bought that uniform at a surplus store." David's jaw tightened. He thought about the men who didn't make it home, the ones whose uniforms were folded and handed to their mothers. He thought about the night in Kandahar when everything went wrong, when he lost his hand saving his squad, when 3 good soldiers died in his arms. "I earned this uniform," David said, his voice steady but firm. "Sure you did, buddy," Tyler smirked, pulling out his own phone. "This is going straight to TikTok. Fake soldier tries to scam military discount." The recording began. Tyler held his phone high, making sure to capture David's face, his uniform, his prosthetic hand. "Everyone, check this out," Tyler announced to his growing audience. "This guy's trying to play dress-up soldier for a discount. Probably never even left his hometown." David stood perfectly still. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He simply reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small leather folder. Inside, nestled in blue velvet, was the Medal of Honor, the pale blue ribbon, the gold star, the eagle that represented the highest recognition his country could give. He placed it gently on the counter. The store went silent. Tyler's phone shook in his hands. The smug expression drained from his face as he stared at the medal. Around them, customers moved closer, their phones now recording something entirely different. That's, someone whispered, that's the Medal of Honor. An elderly man pushed through the small crowd. He was wearing a Vietnam veteran cap, his own service medals pinned to a worn jacket. Son, the old veteran said to Tyler, his voice cutting through the silence, do you have any idea what you just did? Tyler couldn't speak. He looked from the medal to David's face, then back to the medal. This man, the veteran continued, pointing to David, is Staff Sergeant David Martinez. 6 months ago, he received the Medal of Honor from the President of the United States. He lost his hand, saving his entire squad in Afghanistan. 3 men are alive today because of him. The crowd had grown. Other employees emerged from behind counters and stock rooms. The store manager appeared, taking in the scene with growing horror. I didn't know, Tyler stammered. David picked up the medal and returned it to its case. He looked at Tyler, not with anger, but with something approaching pity. You didn't ask, David said simply. You saw what you wanted to see. The store manager stepped forward. Sir, I am so sorry. There's been a terrible... David held up his good hand. It's not your fault, but your employee might benefit from learning what service actually means before he accuses others of faking it. He picked up his phone charger, left exact change on the counter, and walked toward the door. Behind him, the store erupted in whispered conversations and clicking phones. By the time David reached his truck, the original video had been deleted. Tyler had frantically tried to remove it from TikTok, but the internet never forgets. Screenshots had been taken. Screen recordings had been made. Within an hour, the story had exploded across social media, but not in the way Tyler had intended. Instead of fake soldier exposed, the headlines read, Medal of Honor recipient humiliated by store employee. The hashtag Respect Our Heroes began trending. Veterans groups shared the story. News outlets picked it up. David's phone rang constantly. Reporters wanted interviews. Veterans organizations wanted to honor him. The store's corporate headquarters was flooded with angry calls and emails. But David didn't answer the interviews. He didn't seek revenge or demand apologies. He simply continued his quiet life, visiting schools, counseling veterans, and reminding anyone who would listen that service wasn't about recognition, it was about sacrifice. 3 days later, Tyler Walsh found himself facing a room full of executives from the electronics chain's corporate office. The video had cost them thousands in lost business and damaged their reputation nationwide. We're terminating your employment effective immediately, the regional manager said. Your actions don't reflect our company values. Tyler nodded, understanding that his moment of arrogance had cost him more than just a job. It had cost him his integrity. That same day, the store announced a new policy. All employees would undergo sensitivity training focused on recognizing and honoring military service. They established a permanent military discount program and partnered with local veteran organizations for community outreach. David Martinez never sought the spotlight. He never wanted to become a symbol. But sometimes the world needs reminding that heroes walk among us quietly, carrying their medals, not as trophies, but as reminders of the friends they couldn't save and the price they paid for our freedom. A week after the incident, David received a letter from Tyler Walsh. It was handwritten, 2 pages of careful script. Sir, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I needed you to know that what I did was inexcusable. I've enrolled in community college to study American history and military service. I've also begun volunteering at the local VA hospital. I can't undo what I said, but I can learn from it. You didn't just serve our country. You taught me what honor really looks like. Thank you. David read the letter twice, then filed it away with his other military documents. Not because he was angry, but because he believed in second chances. After all, that's what he and his brothers had fought for, a country where people could learn, grow, and become better than they were. In a world quick to judge and slow to understand, David Martinez's story reminds us that true service often goes unrecognized, that real heroes don't demand respect. They earn it through actions, not words. And sometimes, the most important battles aren't fought overseas, but in the checkout lines and coffee shops of our own communities. The Medal of Honor on David's chest wasn't just a decoration. It was a reminder that freedom has a price, and that price is paid by ordinary people who choose to do extraordinary things when their country calls. The next time you see someone in uniform, the next time you encounter a veteran, remember David Martinez. Remember that behind every service member is a story of sacrifice, courage, and quiet dignity that deserves our respect, not our skepticism. Because in the end, the greatest honor we can give our heroes isn't a medal around their neck. It's the recognition that they stood up when others sat down, that they served when others stayed home, and that they gave everything so we could have anything. That's what real valor looks like. That's what America looks like when it remembers what matters most. But David's story was far from over. The ripple effects of that moment in the electronics store would continue to spread in ways no one could have predicted. 6 months after the incident, David received an unexpected phone call. It was from General Patricia Williams, the highest-ranking female officer in the Army, calling from the Pentagon. "Sergeant Martinez," she said, "I've been following your story. We have a proposition for you." The Army wanted David to become the face of a new initiative, the Heroes Recognition Program. It would travel to schools, corporations, and communities across America, educating people about military service and the dangers of stolen valor accusations. David hesitated. He'd never wanted to be a poster child for anything. But when General Williams explained that false stolen valor accusations had increased by 300% in the past 2 years, often targeting legitimate veterans, he understood the mission's importance. "Too many real heroes are being silenced by people who think they know better," she explained. "We need someone who's lived through both sides of this, the service and the judgment." David accepted. His first speaking engagement was back at Roosevelt High School, the same school where he'd spoken before the electronics store incident. But this time, the auditorium was packed. Students, teachers, parents, and local veterans filled every seat. "I want to tell you about a friend of mine," David began, his voice steady. "His name was Miguel Santos. He died in my arms in Afghanistan, trying to save a wounded Afghan translator." The room was silent. Miguel never got a Medal of Honor. He never got recognition, but he died a hero. And somewhere in America today, there's probably someone who looks like Miguel, wearing a uniform, being told he doesn't look like a real soldier. A student in the front row raised her hand. "How do we know the difference between real and fake soldiers?" David smiled gently. "You ask respectfully. You give the benefit of the doubt. You remember that heroes come in all shapes, sizes, and colors. And most importantly, you understand that military service isn't a costume, it's a calling." After his speech, a line of students waited to speak with him. Among them was a young Latino boy, maybe 15, who approached nervously. "Sir," the boy said quietly, "my dad served in Iraq. He doesn't like to talk about it. People sometimes look at him funny when he wears his veteran's cap to the grocery store." David knelt to the boy's eye level. "What's your dad's name?" "Roberto Gonzalez. He was in the 82nd Airborne." David's eyes widened. "Sergeant Roberto Gonzalez from El Paso?" The boy nodded, confused. "Son," David said, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder, "your father saved my life in Fallujah 3 years before Afghanistan. I've been looking for him for years." Tears filled the boy's eyes. "Really? Really? Can you give me his number?" 2 weeks later, David and Roberto met at a small coffee shop in San Antonio. They hadn't seen each other in over a decade. Roberto looked older, grayer, but his eyes still carried that familiar spark of brotherhood. "I heard about the electronics store thing," Roberto said, stirring his coffee. "Man, I'm sorry that happened to you." "It led to something good," David replied. "I'm speaking all over the country now, trying to make sure it doesn't happen to others." Roberto nodded. "It happened to me last month, at a restaurant. Manager said my service dog wasn't real because I looked too young to be a veteran." "What did you do?" "Nothing. Just left. I didn't have a Medal of Honor to prove anything." David leaned forward. "You don't need a medal to prove your worth, brother. You need people who understand that service comes in many forms." Their conversation lasted 3 hours. By the end, Roberto had agreed to join David's speaking tour. 2 veterans, different backgrounds, same mission, educating America about respect and recognition. The Heroes Recognition Program grew rapidly. Within a year, they were speaking to packed auditoriums across the nation. David's story had become more than just a viral moment, it had become a movement. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came during a visit to Walter Reed Medical Center. David was speaking to wounded warriors, many recent amputees learning to navigate life with prosthetics. A young female Marine, Corporal Sarah Chen, raised her hand. "Sir, how do you deal with the stares? The questions? Sometimes I feel like I have to prove myself everywhere I go." David looked at his own prosthetic hand, then back at her. "Corporal, every stare is an opportunity to educate. Every question is a chance to honor those who didn't make it home. We carry their memory in our scars." He paused, looking around the room at the faces of America's newest wounded warriors. That day in the electronics store, I felt small, humiliated, but I realized something important. My value as a person isn't determined by what others think of my service. It's determined by how I choose to use my experience to help others. After the session, Corporal Chen approached him privately. "Sir, I wanted to thank you. I was thinking about giving up, the looks, the comments, the assumption that I can't do things because of my injuries. But hearing your story, it reminds me that we're still fighting. Just a different kind of fight." David nodded. "The war doesn't end when we come home, Corporal. It just changes theaters." Meanwhile, back in San Antonio, the electronics store had transformed completely. The new manager, a Navy veteran named James Thompson, had turned it into a model for veteran-friendly businesses. Military photos lined the walls. A permanent display honored local fallen heroes, and every employee underwent comprehensive training about military culture and service. Tyler Walsh, the young man who had started it all, eventually reached out to David again. This time, it was to invite him to his college graduation. Tyler had earned a degree in social work and was planning to work with veteran organizations. At the graduation ceremony, Tyler's valedictorian speech included these words: "3 years ago, I made the worst mistake of my life. I judged a hero by his appearance and accused him of faking his service. That man could have destroyed me. Instead, he taught me about grace, dignity, and the true meaning of service." Tyler looked directly at David, who sat in the audience with Roberto and several other veterans. "Staff Sergeant Martinez showed me that real strength isn't about being right, it's about being kind. Real courage isn't about attacking others, it's about lifting them up. And real honor isn't something you wear on your chest, it's something you carry in your heart." The auditorium erupted in applause, but David wasn't focused on the sound. He was thinking about Miguel Santos, about all the brothers and sisters who didn't make it home, about the responsibility he carried to honor their memory. After the ceremony, Tyler approached David one final time. "Sir, I know I can never fully make up for what I did, but I want you to know that every veteran I work with, every life I help rebuild, is because you showed me what real service looks like." David shook Tyler's hand, his prosthetic meeting Tyler's firm grip. "Tyler, the fact that you learned from your mistake makes you more valuable than someone who never made one. Use that experience. Help others learn without having to go through the pain." As David drove home that night, he thought about the journey that had brought him here. From the mountains of Afghanistan to the checkout line of an electronics store to stages across America. He thought about the Medal of Honor in his dresser drawer, the one that had changed everything in a single moment. But mostly, he thought about Miguel Santos and the promise he'd made in a dusty Afghan compound to live a life worthy of the sacrifice others had made. The electronics store incident had lasted maybe 5 minutes. The viral video had been viewed millions of times. But the real story, the story of how one moment of judgment became a lifetime of education, how humiliation transformed into healing, that story was still being written. David Martinez had never wanted to be famous. He'd never wanted to be a symbol. But sometimes, heroes don't get to choose their missions. Sometimes the mission chooses them. And in a country still learning how to honor its veterans, still growing in its understanding of sacrifice and service, David's quiet dignity continued to echo. Not just in viral videos or news stories, but in the lives he touched, the minds he changed, and the hearts he helped heal. That's what real valor looks like. Not just the moment of heroism, but the lifetime of service that follows. Not just the medal on the chest, but the mission in the heart. And in small towns and big cities across America, in electronics stores and coffee shops, in schools and hospitals, David's story continued to remind people of a simple truth. Heroes walk among us every day, carrying their burdens quietly, serving without seeking glory, smiling, and teaching us all what it really means to answer the call of duty. The video that once labeled him a fake soldier had become something far more powerful, proof that the most authentic heroes are often the ones who never ask to be recognized, but who, when the moment demands it, stand tall and show the world what courage really looks like.